It didn't start with women. It started with an idea, whispered, repeated, polished until it became sacred truth. At first, it sounded noble. Be strong. Be independent. You don't need a man. It echoed through classrooms, songs, and screens, a quiet revolution disguised as freedom. But here's the dark irony. What began as empowerment slowly mutated into division, because every movement born in pain eventually learns to feed on it. And for decades, women were told that their suffering had one source, men, that every disappointment, every lost dream, every silence had a masculine face. It became an easy story to sell, a villain, a victim, and a promise of power. And so the message spread, not through fists, but through feelings. Commercials painted men as obstacles. Movies mocked them. Sitcoms turned fathers into fools, husbands into punchlines, masculinity into a joke. And people laughed, not realizing the hypnosis had already begun. Because when a lie is repeated long enough, it doesn't need to convince you. It becomes the air you breathe. An entire generation grew up seeing men not as partners, but as prisons. It wasn't their fault. They were raised on resentment disguised as empowerment. And when you're told you've been wronged, anger feels like purpose. Hate starts to feel like healing. But you can't teach hate without killing something sacred inside the student. That's the tragedy no one talks about. The modern woman was taught to build her strength on rejection, not harmony. To speak louder, but feel less. To protect herself from the very thing she once longed for, masculine warmth. The seed was never about liberation. It was about separation, because a divided world is easier to control. While men and women turned against each other, someone else, unseen, profited from the chaos. The narrative shifted. History was rewritten quietly, line by line. Strength became toxic. Discipline became oppression. And masculinity itself became a crime with no trial. Fathers were mocked, leaders shamed, boys told to sit still and apologize for existing. The inversion was complete when men began to hate what they were born to be. Every generation after grew more disconnected, not from each other, but from truth. Provider became patriarch. Protector became oppressor. Masculine became a warning label. And women, thinking they were rising, were actually reacting. Reaction isn't freedom. It's emotional dependence disguised as strength. When you define yourself by what you reject, you become the mirror of what you hate. And now we live in that reflection. A world where men walk on eggshells, and women can no longer tell the difference between control and care, between love and weakness. That's what the inversion did. It didn't destroy truth. It simply flipped it. It turned strength into guilt, guidance into manipulation, partnership into power struggle. It was never about equality. It was about control, rewriting the script while we were too busy blaming each other to notice. Disobedience to connection because, in actuality, women have never detested males. They learned to do so, according to what they were taught. Love weakens people. Compromise entails subjugation, and trusting a man entails betraying all the women who have suffered before them. The feminine insurrection lost its heart as a result. The protest turned into a show, an unjustified act of defiance, anger without purpose, a meaningless movement, because removing what makes you whole will not lead to peace, is now seen everywhere. This calm pride in not needing anyone can be heard in music, movies, and everyday conversations. The same mantra is repeated in every lyric, slogan, and influencer. Don't ever rely on men. He can be replaced. You are sufficient, and she might be. However, being alone does not equate to being sufficient. Without closeness, independence isn't power. It's loneliness disguised as high fashion. Because no one was honest with her, what began as empowerment has turned into weariness. That the softening of the feminine does not diminish its potency. It gets it. Balance would have constituted true revolt. Choosing harmony over dominance. Redefining the relationship with masculinity rather than rejecting it. However, balance was never rewarded by the world. It rewarded indignation, cells of anger, Clicks are made by division. You stay consuming while you are in conflict. Thus, the revolt continued to flame. Furthermore, the more it blazed, the more it devoured the feminine spirit, the same thing it professed to defend. You can sense it now in her eyes, posture, and tone. The woman who used to exude warmth now exudes protection. Men are now in competition with the woman who previously inspired them. She also finds it incomprehensible that no one wants to argue with her anymore. That is the cost of a rebellion that lost sight of its objective. It began to fight against love and ceased to work for peace. The artificial enemy, Section 4. Hatred does not simply manifest itself. It is constructed word by word and brick by brick. Additionally, there is always someone counting the profit behind every division. Because communities were solid, families were strong, and people required less assistance from the system when men and women worked together. However, they became ideal consumers, perfectly distracted, and perfectly divided when they were emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually isolated. Nobody wants to acknowledge that. The conflict between men and women is not a natural one. It is designed. It may be traced back to decades of advertising, sitcoms that celebrate independence while making fun of tradition, and commercials that make fun of fathers. Music videos that mock loyalty while applauding adultery, and news headlines that intentionally put one gender against the other. The undertone of every message is the same. Have no faith. Avoid making a commitment. Avoid connecting, because those who are lonely tend to buy more. People who are angry scroll for longer. People who are confused are more likely to obey. And someone else is subtly winning while we quarrel over who is at fault, men or women. Businesses prosper when a household collapses. When families get weaker, governments become stronger. When outrage trends, the media makes money. It's business, not conspiracy. And the product is us. Consider it. The self-help sector, dating apps, cosmetics companies, and a never-ending supply of empowerment products would all vanish if men and women truly valued one another once more. This connection is essential to everything. Since a contented lady doesn't require approval and a calm man doesn't require escape, they maintain our conflict, not with weapons, but with words, not with violence, but with stories. Because it's simpler to avoid confronting the reality. Both sides believe the whispers that femininity is weak and masculinity is harmful. We were never intended to be adversaries. The modern lady is not a bad person. The man of today is not broken. Both of them fall prey to the same piece of equipment. One who understands that discord sells more than love. Thus, they never stop giving us new conflicts to fight. Politics, identities, ideologies, and sexes. We won't realize the prison we're creating together as long as we're upset. The worst part is that it was successful. Men ceased to be leaders. Women ceased to have faith. Additionally, the link that once supported civilization has been reduced to sadness and hashtags. Hatred was never innate. It was put into production. It is currently mass-produced. Section 5. The breakdown of a relationship. There was a time when love was easy. Together, the two faced the world. Harmoniously, but not flawlessly or equally in every way. They were aware of their mutual need. Their strength was that. However, love is increasingly viewed as a contest. A show, a silent war of smiles in which nobody prevails. The instant equality gave way to rivalry. The partnership was over. The instant the connection turned into a competition. Every relationship seems to be a negotiation these days. Who contributes more? Who makes fewer sacrifices? Who is in charge? Who is safe here is no longer a question. They inquire as to who is in charge. And everything altered with that transformation. Because trust vanishes when love is used as leverage. Every act of generosity seems like a plan. Every disagreement, it seems to be manipulation. It seems like a trade with each touch. The world informed men that women could never be satisfied and advised women to never rely on men. Both gave up trying as a result. These days, it's everywhere. In restaurants, couples sit with their phones hooked to their screens rather than to one another. Arguments masquerading as limits. Relationships boiled down to self-worth, alignment, and energy exchanges. It sounds progressive. It seems empty, because balance sheets cannot sustain love. In surrender, it endures. The readiness to offer, trust, and need. However, needing someone is seen as weakness in today's society. People construct barriers rather than homes because relying on anyone is a recipe for failure. They claim to adore themselves, but in reality, they are protecting themselves. Additionally, the bed that used to be intimate is now far apart. Unless they perform, men feel unwelcome. Unless they are in charge, women feel insecure. Additionally, they both secretly long for a world they were taught to despise. Love meant us, not me in that case. Partnerships did not end because people lost interest. People stopped thinking it was safe to care for it, which is why it perished. How can you ever relax in a trust when you're raised believing that women are dishonest and men are dangerous? When you're both waiting for the other to turn on you, how can you possibly create something lasting? The relationship of today is a cold battle. Surface-level smiles, underlying skepticism, dogma in place of closeness, and language games in place of affection. Furthermore, nobody realizes that the game was made to keep both sides losing while everyone is attempting to win. In actuality, love was never meant to be equitable. It was meant to be authentic. Furthermore, genuine connection is impossible in a society where people are too preoccupied with protecting themselves to open up to others. The narrative's ascent is covered in Section 6. You don't have to argue with people if you want to alter their perspectives. All you have to do is improve your storytelling. And society did precisely that. They created a story. The narrative went on, whispering, shouting, and screaming. Men are the problem. It began quietly. A strong female protagonist who didn't require assistance. A romantic comedy here. A sitcom joke there. It appeared innocuous, even motivating. Repetition, however, transforms fiction into religion. Every pop song, commercial, and film had the same emotional beat. When a woman is harmed by a guy, she recovers on her own. One message, without any complexity or nuance. It's better for you without him. The story sold really well. It generated revenue. It created heroes. Identity was created. However, it also created emptiness. Because you teach men that love is dangerous when you teach women that men are hurdles. Why would he ever appear to play the hero when he is always portrayed as the antagonist? Empathy soon becomes gendered as well. A man who is in pain is weak. She's a courageous woman who is in pain. A man who is desperate for love. A lady who is empowered and seeks love. Even compassion become political as a result of the script's extreme reversal, and the algorithms made matters worse. They discovered what enrages us. They discovered that we stay online because of outrage. Thus, more of it was fed to both sides. Men are garbage. Women have delusions. A never-ending poisonous loop. Every trending sound, every swipe, and every scroll added fuel to a fire that no one could recall starting. The story now writes itself. Influencers make fun of conventional partnerships. As a form of self-care, comedians make jokes about divorce. Podcasts discuss gender as if it were a sport. However, something genuine is dying beneath the commotion. Our capacity to regard one another as fellow humans. We have substituted theory for compassion, commentary for connection, and ideology for love. Yet something inside of us continues to resist after decades of conditioning. Since truth never fades, it conceals itself, and in their hearts, men and women still experience the same pain. We couldn't have been created for this. That is the narrative's power. It doesn't have to fully persuade you. All it has to do is make you so confused that you lose sight of what true love looks like. Additionally, it can sell you everything you need to replace it once you forget. The broken mirror, Section 7. The war she is fighting is no longer with males, even though she is unaware of it. She's the one involved. She has started to view everything caring, nurturing, and feminine as weakness as a result of years of being taught that softness implies submission, strength means rejection, and peace is surrender. Additionally, She now sees conflict in the mirror rather than just a lady. Although it feels like an enemy, the reflection that is staring back is not. The same qualities that once made her shine, empathy, grace, compassion, and trust, now appear alien, archaic, and degrading. She learned to hate such things, to eliminate them, and to exchange them for performance, stance, and armor. However, you cannot ruin who you were meant to be without also destroying yourself. That's what millions of women are going through in private right now. An identity civil war. Half of them desire to receive love. It is not required by the other half. Half wishes to take a nap. Only when battling does the other side feel protected. Additionally, the universe constantly tells them which side prevails whenever they attempt to strike a balance. It's evident in their faces. The self-assured smiles that never make it to the eyes. The voices that seem strong, yet have cracks at the edges. There's that practice laugh. The strength is actually fatigue. Because every woman secretly understands that to despise the masculine is to despise the aspect of herself that was intended to fit in with it. Nobody ever discusses that catastrophe. The mirror that gave women their meaning is also erased when men are stripped of it. There was never a competition between masculinity and femininity. They were reflections, each of which is defined by the others. Without the other, neither is whole. However, the world broke that mirror and instructed her to refer to the fragmented parts as progress. She is now gazing at those fragments. Each one portrays a distinct aspect of her ideal self. The barbarian, the boss, the goddess, and the survivor. However, since home was never intended to be a title, none of them feel like home. It was thought to be an emotion. Additionally, she hasn't been comfortable with herself in a very long time. She applies cosmetics to boost her confidence every morning and removes it at night, seeing her inability to post about her quiet tiredness. The mirror is truthful. It demonstrates all that the slogans don't. She is always asked the same quiet question by the expense of pretending, the weariness of fighting, the grief of separation, and the reflection. Why does strength feel so weighty if this is how it appears? The Silent Guys, Section 8. They didn't defend themselves. At least not loudly. There was only silence. No marches, no manifestos, no irate headlines. The sort of quiet that gradually descends, resembling the tide receding from a coast. At first, it's so subtle that you hardly notice its disappearance until one day you glance around and see that the ocean has vanished. For years, males experienced it. In the hopes of becoming more accepted and lovable, they made an effort to comprehend, adjust, and become softer, more sympathetic, and more sensitive. However, it didn't, because they lost their respect the instant they ceased being the rock. And they were labeled weak the instant they displayed emotion. Whatever they did, it was incorrect. They were controlling if they were in charge. They were pathetic if they followed. It was assumed that they would give. It was embarrassing if they had difficulty. Thus, they discovered the one thing for which the world was unprepared. They acquired the ability to vanish. Not spiritually, emotionally, or physically. They were silent, withdrew, and created their own serenity by themselves. Now you can see them. The males who no longer debate, pursue, or provide explanations. They remain silent while they work, lift, and produce. Because the only remaining space where they are not informed that they are mistaken is silence. And something changed during that quiet. The world began to seem more empty. Not because men ceased to exist, but rather because their stability, anchoring, and presence were no longer there. Women also started to sense it. However, they were unsure of what to call it. They claimed that relationships were shaky, that love felt uncertain, and that the world felt colder. They were unaware that it was due to the withdrawal of the masculine presence, that silent, protective force. A man no longer views women as potential when he first meets them. He perceives danger. He perceives danger. He witnesses heartache, hashtags, and headlines. Thus, he remains courteous but aloof, amiable but aloof, physically present but emotionally absent. Since every attempt to be present was met with punishment, he learned to be at peace by being absent. Nobody ever discusses that catastrophe. Men's quiet does not imply indifference. It's defense. It's weariness. It's the sound of generations that sacrificed everything and were still held accountable. The world feels their absence everywhere, even though it acts as though it doesn't notice. It feels cooler in the house. It feels rougher on the streets. There is less laughter because the world doesn't simply become weaker when men stop caring. It becomes aimless. It becomes unbalanced. Additionally, the women who were told they didn't require men are starting to see that harmony, not ownership, was what they lost. The reckoning is in Section 9. There is a limit to every falsehood. It finally crumbles beneath the weight of its own void. We are currently there. There is a decline in the slogans. It's a quiet noise. The grins are beginning to fade. And below it all, a sincere thing is starting to emerge. A silent realization that this isn't working. The hatred no longer feels like strength. It doesn't feel liberating to be alone. Additionally, the quiet within is not drowned out by the noise. Women are starting to sense it. It has been felt by men for years. The mistrust, the tension, the chill, and the distance between them. It isn't organic. It was propagated, sold, and taught. For what purpose? In order for us to all feel equal? No, so that every one of us can feel isolated? Because it is simpler to govern a divided populace. And the longer we continue to battle ghosts, the longer the true masterminds of this agony can continue to profit from our suffering. This is the unexpected truth, though. No matter how much programming you do, human nature cannot be destroyed. Love is a necessity that cannot be eliminated. It is impossible to change the biochemistry of connection. It remains hidden beneath decades of dishonesty, pride, and suffering. However, it remains there. The reckoning is that. Not anger or retaliation, but insight. The adversary isn't men. Women do not suffer harm. Both of us have been poisoned and fed lies till we have lost the ability to trust, respect, and need one another. And that might be the most crucial aspect. Our love wasn't just lost. We were unable to recall how it felt. However, the reality is patient. It waits. It always does. Because men and women are starting to remember and see one another through the eyes of something old, something straightforward, something genuine, rather than through lenses of fear or ideology. They are coming to understand that being masculine is protective rather than harmful. That when two people come together without ego, something divine returns. And that femininity is healing rather than weak. The truth was never on either side, despite what the outside world taught us. It was always in the middle, in the equilibrium, in the collaboration, in the harmony that results from two people remembering each other. They had no intention of competing. They were supposed to finish. The reckoning is that. A return to integrity, harmony, and the timeless truth that underpinned all we formerly referred to as love, not a revolution. We may finally gaze across that shattered border, see each other clearly for the first time in decades, and whisper the one apology that ever mattered when the clamor finally stops and the pride finally goes away. I didn't realize you weren't my adversary.